How do I share the link? No.
Click that. Yeah, click that. That's to share. And then you copy it.
That's good. Yeah, cool. All right, I can't see what they're saying, so y'all gonna have to tell me.
Yeah. You can if they're watching the stream, they're gonna chat over here. See, this is their YouTube chat.
Y'all get that link? Two users, two viewers, two viewers. Chris, I'm gonna turn this up so they can hear you. You might want to turn your speakers down. You're feeding back. That's better. All right, we got three viewers. So they're starting to pass around, I guess. We'll wait till the viewers get up before we start chatting. We're just waiting for users to join. So we're gonna pause before we start chatting.
We'll start. We'll start talking about development, and I think a lot of misconceptions people have on land development and flooding. I think there's a lot of myths that people believe.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll start there.
Clean up some of the misconceptions. Hey, did you send me your? Could you message me some of the bullet points that we talked about?
Who, me?
Yeah, the bullet points.
Yeah.
Send them in
And
message.
also, if anybody sends any questions out, you're gonna have to.
Well, Michael and them are, and the rest of the guys are gonna help me take a look at those.
Because I can't see them.
We'll see it, right? Don't say it. Because if they do post on Facebook, they have to switch accounts back and forth.
Alright, I just sent you a text with all the comments.
All right, that'll be easier.
I've got a couple other things too. We can go over. How much time we went over?
All right, we're just waiting for more users to join before we start talking, so bear with us, guys. Whoever's watching, there's a chat channel on the right. You're welcome to ask questions over there as we go along.
It's on. Oh well.
And
it's on phone. It's at the bottom.
And we'll discuss that as we go forward. Let's just let some users join before we start talking.
You can't comment on a live stream, can you?
Yeah, you can, over on the right-hand side.
Well,
Did you get the link? Let me send you the link. Do you have the link?
I'm in.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm in.
you're on the YouTube or the Facebook?
YouTube.
All right, cool.
Hey, Dad. For them, it's not on the right.
All
It's underneath.
So you sent you some chat. Type something in the chat. Make sure that's working correctly. I think it is. I think everything's set up properly. Y'all haven't posted it yet?
I didn't know about it yet. Mark. Live video.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way we do it. Let some more users join. User count is starting to go up a little bit. So let the user count go up. Guys, bear with us. We're just waiting for the user count to grow up, to go up some, and then we'll start talking. If you're joining us, good afternoon, or good evening, actually. Thanks for joining the YouTube channel. We're going to talk about Central here and ask and answer some questions. questions. If you have some questions that you want to ask and answer, post them in the live feed chat, and we're certainly going to go over them. We're going to give it a few minutes to allow a few more people to join because we don't want to just start talking when other people have a chance to chime in. So I will be taking questions, and we will be discussing pretty much the hot topics of Central. Some of the gossip, maybe drainage, infrastructure. Going to be some major topics here, and I would enjoy anyone asking anything that they want to ask, as long as it's a valid question, because we know how other things can be around this town. We just want to make sure that we're asking and answering and talking about valid topics. So we'll give it another minute or so, or maybe a couple minutes, to see how many users are actually joining, and then we'll start talking about it. All right. So let's give it another minute or two. We have a few more users joining. Welcome. This is a live chat. I'm Marcus Michelli. I have Chris Michelli on the other line. And we're going to start talking about central politics, central infrastructure, central drainage, and just whatever questions that come up inside of the top chat topics. We're going to see it in. Let's keep it going. So they got it in the other group too. All right. Well, welcome to YouTube. I'm Marcus. I have Chris in here with me as well.
I hope they can hear me.
I'm sure they can hear you. If not, I'll change it up a little bit. So we're going to go over a few hot topics here. I think the first thing that I'd like to say to folks is something a little personal. Here in Central, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Here in Central, we're all passionate. Everyone's passionate in Central. Everyone's passionate about the same topics, the same issues. We all differ slightly. So what ends up happening to us is we all end up destroying each other over just a slight difference of opinion. Slight differences. Schools, housing, infrastructure, taxes. I think that we all have to recognize that we have to start figuring out a way to take the tone down a little bit. We may not agree. That's fine. But this is our neighbors. Our kids were raised here. Our children know each other. Most of us go to church together. We've got to stop tearing each other down. I'm guilty. So I'm not saying that I'm not, because I am. I'm guilty of it as well. But we got to certainly start taking that down. Now, with that said, I'm going to let Chris speak for a second. Chris, you got anything you want to get started on?
My first topic of discussion is development and flooding concerns. I think that a lot of people have, and misconceptions that people maybe don't fully understand as far as maybe the design process and construction considerations and why things are done the way they are. They may appear on the surface to be one thing, but maybe in practicality a completely different thing. I'll go ahead and get started, I guess. I think a lot of people think that with growth comes flooding issues. And I think that's probably one of the biggest myths. It depends on how you attack the drainage issues, what type of design considerations you take into account. Growth does not necessarily have to mean that you're going to flood or you're going to deal with flooding issues.
So how does Central take their current growth? Let's say John Brown wants to build a subdivision. What are we doing now, and what do you think we should be doing?
I think right now the minimal standards for the city of Central are a little bit outdated. Not a lot of modern developments use the same design considerations. One of the biggest things that I would say that is common in Central, one of the big problems is roadside ditch. In construction, it's easy simple. You just dig a ditch in the ground and try to drain everything out. But when that happens, you're still going to need some sort of culvert for driveways or roadways, and then people burn leaves in their culverts, backs everything up. These are localized flooding issues that people deal with all the time.
So when you see a lot of the chats that are going on in Facebook, and a lot of these central groups, the Rants and Raves groups, the CNN groups, the Butthurt groups, a lot of the information is coming from local people that are experiencing local drainage issues. You know, their ditches are flooding, or the street is flooding in front of their house that didn't used to flood. What do you think is the cause of that?
I think primarily maintenance issues. I think almost, I would say 78% probably maintenance issues. People having overgrown vegetation within drainage outlets, clogging up ditches. Everybody knows in Louisiana that if you put a rock on the ground 2 years later, it's probably going to be covered in dirt, mud, and grass. I think a lot of people have those problems with culverts. I would imagine most people, if you go out to your driveway and look at the culvert going underneath it, it's not completely, it's submerged a little bit into the ground. You'll have, coverage on half of it, so you don't get the full flow through all those pipes. And when that happens, I mean, a lot of times these things are designed to handle a certain amount of capacity. They're not designed, for that kind of thing. So,
what is your background in this?
I'm a civil engineer registered with the Texas Board of Engineers. I've been working in my field and studying in my field for about 9 years.
All right. And so currently, what do you work on? You build subdivisions? That's pretty much what you work. We work for developers. You design and build subdivisions. And if that's the case, when you design and build those subdivisions, what differs between what you do inside of the state of Texas and currently what's required here in the city of Central and the state of Louisiana?
Well, my main job title is design work. I do a lot of residential land development design work. I do lot grading. I do gravity fed utilities, pressure utilities, anything inside a subdivision boundary. I've dabbled in it at least a little bit. The differences between what I see on a daily basis and what Central has, or at least their minimum standards for what they allow, I would say curb and gutter, roadside, curb and gutter is the way things need to go. It requires so little maintenance. You don't have to worry about vegetation issues. The way that they're designed is to handle minimum and maximum velocities within the pipes. So even if there's heavy sedimentation in the water that's draining out, they're designed to flow fast enough to not allow that sedimentation to settle into the bottom of the pipes.
All right. So if you build a new subdivision, we have a new subdivision that we're building over off of Hooper Road, and it's built directly across the street from Biltmore. With the new design plans and the way the design plans are, how does the, quote, as what they say in these central groups they call watershed, which is a generic term, how is water shedding off of that property on the adjacent properties? Or does it?
Well, generally speaking, you are not allowed to flow onto adjacent properties at all. The rule, I think what a lot of people see are when a new subdivision comes in, it appears to be raised. It appears to be elevated a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet above the adjacent property. And that's not necessarily telling the whole story. What usually happens is the backup lots are graded and elevated for it to drain everything away from the adjacent properties and into the subdivision, almost like a bowl. And the streets work as their own channel, their own flow, their own river to direct things away from other properties. A lot of times, if you have a certain size acreage, so much impermeable surfaces, which means concrete pretty much, then they will require some sort of mitigation. Mitigation is basically just a way for a development to slowly release all the water that's coming into the development to go out. Um, so the rule is, if you have a drainage channel, say Amite River or whatever Beaver Bayou, whatever it may be, and you have a static or a 100-year water surface elevation in that channel, you are not allowed from your development to increase the elevation of that water surface downstream by flowing the same amount of water from your development into that channel at a faster rate. If you do that, then it'll stack all the way downstream, and you'll end up having backup. That's what causes flooding.
So what does Central do now to prevent that from happening?
A lot of the newer developments I've noticed have been having mitigation, proper mitigation, what it seems. I think that a lot of people like to blame their flooding problems on these developments, but I would say that it's probably the opposite effect. I think the older developments actually have larger drainage issues than the newer developments. I actually pulled some data from a resiliency plan for the City of Central survey the other day, and I know that a lot of people think that drainage is so horrible in Central and everybody's flooding all the time, but I don't really actually think that's the case. According to this survey, 83% of people say they have never flooded before. This survey was done in 2012. I know that since the August 2016 flood, there has been a little bit of change, and I mean, you know this as well as anybody. When we went kayaking down the Amite River, or the Amite River,
yeah, sure.
The path of the river had changed because there's been so much silt deposit from where I believe that flood.
I did a question and answer session with, I'm trying to remember who it was. It was with because what happens with the state is the state is issued to where the Amite or drainage ways like the Amite are now maintained by the parish that they're in. So the Amite River is taken care of on the east side by Livingston Parish, and on the west side of the river is taken care of by Baton Rouge. And what I discovered with that is that river hasn't been dredged, if I recall right. I may be off a few years on the date, but it was like 1951, the last time that river has been dredged or touched. Most people that I spoke to would claim that it had never been dredged, but honestly, it's been dredged so long ago nobody remembers it. It was either in the 40s or the 50s is the last time that was dredged. And when you and I looked at it, the first thing that we noticed was two things: is the river is very shallow in some places. In some places, it's completely clogged up and made the river change directions. And on the west side, the central side of the river, all the way from North Central all the way down to, if you really want to go that far, to Florida Boulevard, a lot of the drainage ways were silted in, so to speak. You had to walk up 5 or 6 feet to get into the bayous that are draining out of the subdivisions. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. And on top of that, I mean, we noticed that being that the river changed paths, you have embankments that are being eroded out, and all the trees and vegetation's falling into the river and making it really even worse.
That's right, because we had to get out of the kayaks inside of the Amite by itself on many occasions because there was so much debris in the water, it was impassable. And it was also restricting the flow of the water getting down the river. Now, since then, I've talked to one of the news reporters, and she had reached out to the governor, and the governor had responded by issuing a memorandum to the local governments that are over the river, to start dredging these things and start digging them out, start digging those in bayous. But what the problem I saw was is some of the drainage that's coming out of the back of the subdivision, like back of Planche Road, back of Bellingrass subdivision, back of Bellingrass Lakes. What am I missing, Chris? There was a few other subdivisions that we passed through. Most of those bayous were silted in. So even if you dig out the bayous, being that they're silted in where they're draining into the Amite, the water's going to have to rise 4 or 5 feet inside of those bayous before it's actually able to drain into the Amite. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. I think on top of that, a lot of people are under the misconception that Central has complete jurisdiction over a lot of these channels, and they don't. They're just a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, but the channels that are draining into the Amite itself, we should have control over that. Am I wrong?
No, the channels, I would say most of them probably, yes.
Like we passed by the bayou that's draining out of the backside of Planche, according to our GPS, the backside of Planche Road. And that was, when we walked down that bayou, there was a 5 or 6 foot hill that we had to walk over to get into the bayou. So it could theoretically possibly drain into the Amite until the water level reached 5 or 6 feet. So I would think that, the city of Central, or at least East Baton Rouge Parish, would be responsible for that, correct?
Yeah, more than likely. I mean, it really depends. Not every roadway or drainage way inside the city limits is owned by the city of Central, so it's really hard to say. I would say most of them probably do belong to the city. Generally speaking, a lot of your residential, smaller roadways and drainage ways will belong to the city. They'll be required to maintain them, which is a whole other topic. But usually your major roadways like Carmel Springs Road, Hooper Road, those are state right-of-ways, and the city of Central not only is not allowed to touch them from the state without, but they're not really taxing for. They don't have revenue. They don't have budget.
Right. So it's not a local issue. It's more either a parish issue or a state issue.
Right. I think it's both. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's honestly when the governor and the feedback that I got, I can't remember. I think it was a wetlands commission or something or another they called themselves. The feedback that I got from those guys when I discussed it with them was each parish is responsible for each side of the Amite River that they own. Baton Rouge I think the ordinance or whatever, or the memorandum was signed in like the 40s or 50s to some sort of agreement. So the state has passed the buck off to the local parishes or the parish maintenance crews, which I don't think either maintenance crew in Livingston or East Baton Rouge Parish, because what I've seen on the Amite River doesn't look like it's been touched in probably 30, 40, 50 years by anyone. And the only reason that it was brought to anyone's attention at all is merely by purely accident of us trying to have a boys' day out, and then bringing it to attention to the local news media, which then got to the bottom of it. So, go ahead.
I'd imagine most people probably haven't been there in that area as we went into in a long time. They didn't seem to have much traffic.
No. I mean, once we started getting down closer towards Florida Boulevard, we started seeing a little bit of traffic, but in general, that's probably accurate. There wasn't very many people that were accessing that area. So, go ahead.
I think Central's main responsibility is for mostly localized flooding issues, which currently IVTS has jurisdiction over city services contract. They currently possess the contract, so they're by contract required to maintain all city roads, city drainage infrastructure. That contract does not require them to go build new bridges and install new pipes. That's not what the city services contract is for. City services is for them to dig ditches, build potholes, and whatever else they come across. That's two of their main duties. I think that will only get them so far. I think City of Central is getting to a point where they need to kind of update their design criteria for engineering purposes. They
So design criteria meaning that when we build something, we should have a different, a more stringent type of infrastructure. You know, curb and gutter as opposed to ditches, roadway ditches, and asphalt streets. Is that what you're saying?
Almost every street you drive down is asphalt street, and there's a big ditch off to the side of it full of trash and grass and weeds, and it doesn't drain.
So you do most of these.
That's buried halfway into the ground.
So you do a lot of these development projects across the country, mainly focused in Texas lately. So what do they require? Do they require concrete streets?
Almost everywhere that I'm at requires Portland cement, 6 to 8 inch streets. 6 to 8 inches of concrete reinforced. Very few places, unless you're out and outside of the city limits or what they consider ETJ, extraterritorial jurisdiction, you can't really put asphalt in anywhere unless it's temporary. The reason they do that is to install curbside gutters. You'll have a crown street with gutter on both sides, and it'll pipe that's, I think Central is designed, at least for roadside ditch, to carry a 2-year storm, which is a pretty standard everyday thing. And then where does a 100-year storm go? Out here where we design from 2-year, 3-year, all the way to 100-year storm. So whatever is not designed to go within the pipes, whatever the pipe doesn't handle, the street has a cascading effect to where it flows everything downstream to a certain direction. And it directs the flow so you don't have ponding, you don't have the backup flooding issues. And on top of that, you don't have to worry about maintaining all these ditches everywhere. So those are some of my
welcome to, let me introduce again, because whoever's watching, we've peaked quite a few times here with our viewers. We have an engineer on the phone that's talking about drainage, which happens to be my son, which is Chris Michelli. I'm Marcus. We've been watching, and everyone's been watching drainage studies and drainage this about Central over the last couple of years. So Chris is here as a licensed engineer that does development for subdivisions and commercial properties, mainly focused in Texas. So he's doing a comparison to what they require in another city, in another jurisdiction, as to what we currently are doing here. Chris is born and raised here in Central. I've lived here personally for 30 plus years, more or less, raised all my kids here, been married here, own my home here. So I guess if you consider 30 years an implant, I guess I'm a 30-year resident implant. Now, I wasn't born and raised here. I was born in Baker and moved out here late 80s, 87, 88. So we kind of seen Central grow quite a bit. Chris was born and raised here. My other children were born and raised here. So they all seen what Central used to be. They seen what Central was back in the 80s. I knew what Central was back, from the 70s through the 80s. And so what we're talking about here is we're talking about drainage and infrastructure. Being that there's a lot more people joining, so I'd like to make another statement really quick that I've made earlier. Everybody in this town is passionate about Central. I've lived here, my property's here, most of my investments are here in Central. My children, this is their hometown. They love it. Our kids know each other. We go to church together, and we all sit on Facebook and bash each other. I'm not accusing anyone because I'm guilty of it too. I'm just simply saying, let's get the details, let's get the facts from the professional. This is a professional that I have on the phone. He so happens to also be born and raised here in Central. So he loves this town just as much as every one of you guys do, as well as me, as well as anyone that lives in my household, as well as my extended family and my family. So I think what you should listen to is just take his word to heed, and let's quit the nonsense. Let's quit the Facebook engineering, and let's just really hear what the engineering facts are. I don't promote David Barrow. I don't promote Junior Shelton. I'm not promoting me. I am just simply sitting here allowing people to actually hear the unedited factual data on drainage and on infrastructure. That's what we're here to do. If you're wanting to listen to that, this is a great time to learn about drainage and infrastructure. If your property's flooding, send a question into one of the chat groups. There are people in the chat groups that are monitoring the questions. They will forward those to us and we'll answer them. As long as they're valid questions and they're legitimate and they're not just something just to be trolling. So I state again, let's try to just really listen to what the engineers have to say, what my experience is talking to the state, what some of the news reporters that have fed back to me, that have talked to the governor and talked to some of the wetlands managements that manage these areas, and let's just hear what the factual data is. I'm not here to defend a position of Junior. I'm not here to defend a position of David Barrow or any of the council members or any decisions that anyone's made or their history or their family or their mama's brother's sister. I don't care. We're talking about drainage. We're talking about infrastructure, and we're not here to tear anybody down. So if you got a question, post a question to one of the Facebook chats. Let the engineer answer it. If I know it, I'll answer it, whether it's on topic or off topic. So we're going to get back to it. We were just talking about the Amite River. We were just talking about the bayous and creeks that flow into the Amite River from the west side of the Amite, which would be the central side. As you know, you probably have seen my videos, if y'all watched any of them, of us kayaking down through those areas to answer those questions as why is it the water draining into the Amite? Well, if you watch those videos that I posted, you'll see why. It doesn't take an engineer to figure it out. It doesn't take a backhoe operator or someone that's experienced in dirt work to figure it out. Watch those videos. Watch how those bayous and creeks are silted in. And then you want to wonder why your ditch is not draining. Then you might want to, those questions should be answered. Then it should answer the question as to what we need to be doing in Central to fix our drainage and infrastructure. So we're also going to talk briefly about the infrastructure and the way it's being built in Central. We're going to talk about curb and gutter. And we're going to talk about asphalt streets and regular roadside ditches and why some of those things are not draining and what we've experienced by physically going to these sites, engineering, taking topographical data, and making an educated decision on what's going on. I know that we've had some bayous that have been redistributed or redirected, and we've had some bayous that have been dug out and through Junior Shelton and what Junior Shelton has been doing. But maybe there's some focus that needs to be placed in some certain other areas that have just recently been identified. I know our experience is coming back from the behind of Bellingrath Lakes, the things that we saw personally within the last few weeks. Bellingrath Lakes, backside of Planche, Thibodeau Road, backside of Forest Glen, Evergreen Hills, that area from the Magnolia Beach Road area heading, I guess that would be south, down the Amite River. There's video of that. We've taken it. I don't think anyone's been in some of the areas that we've been in a very long time, quite honestly. And so I would suggest that you join the group. Not to argue with anyone. Just go look at those videos. And then we'll start talking about drainage. Now, Chris, we're going to step over into infrastructure. So currently in Central, I'm not going to go into economics of it. Currently in Central, let's just talk about drainage. So currently in Central, they're building subdivisions. And some of the subdivisions would not meet the standards that you guys do in other states and other cities. Is that accurate?
No, they would not be accepted by any of the jurisdictions.
Would you say that the Louisiana laws, or is it Louisiana laws, or was it our city P&Z that has a very low standard? Which one would it be? Do you know?
Well, generally there will be more than one reviewer. There will be more than one jurisdiction. The county will have some say, the East Baton Rouge Parish will have some say, and the city of Central will have their say over certain things. Generally, at the end of some sort of development, usually the streets or whatever drainage is within what they consider at the time of the development as a future right-of-way. The city, at the end, once they do a final inspection of the property, they will adopt the right-of-way and take control of maintenance responsibilities.
Someone's asking something.
So that's generally how it works. I actually pulled some data from the City of Central Louisiana Resiliency Plan that I read, and it has a little bit of data on impermeable impermeable surfaces for a lot of what they consider sub watersheds. So we're in pretty much, they break it up into sub watersheds based on which sort of river or tributary takes the majority of the flow. So ultimately, everything in central flows to where the Amite and Amite rivers meet. But they break it up into smaller sections based on smaller tributaries. So I'll read this first. This was quoted in the resiliency plan by a guy named Kizak and Schuler, and they say that the threshold condition for when watershed shows significant impacts range from 10 to 20% of impermeable surfaces. So basically what they're saying is if you have an undeveloped land, say 10 acres, and you develop the entire development, all 10 acres of it, and you 10 to 20% of that surface is either concrete roadway or a building with a roof or anything that does not soak water, like vegetated ground or wooded surfaces. 10 to 20% will show significant impacts of increased runoff. So that being said, 10 to 20%. This is some data. It's a couple years old, but I think it gives a good picture of existing conditions of certain sub-watersheds. Blackwater Bayou Amite River has about 4% impermeable surfaces existing. Shoe Creek Development has about 15%. Beaver Bayou 9%. Beaver Creek, Amite River 3%. Beaver Creek, Sandy Creek 4%. And I think that was it. That's all the subsurface watersheds or sub-watersheds in the area. But that is not considered 100% build out. So if you consider once the land is completely developed, all the acreage is bought up, you can almost double those impermeable surface percentages. So 4% of the land would be impermeable.
Define for the layman what impermeable means.
Impermeable or impervious surface just means that it won't soak up water. So if you think of a pervious surface being a sponge, an impervious surface would be concrete or plastic or something that does not soak up water.
In other words, subdivisions that are using curb and gutter have more concrete than subdivisions that have ditches. What is the benefit of the curb and gutter versus the ditches?
Well, the curb and gutter can be designed to a higher standard. I mean, you can pipe flow out whatever size flow you want. Sometimes they even pipe 100-year flow. And theoretically, if you pipe 100-year flow, that will give you a 1% chance of flooding per year, which is really low. That's a really high standard. Generally speaking, most streets and roadway ditches are designed for 2 to 3 year storms.
Gotcha.
A detention pond may be designed anywhere from 10 to 25 years storm. So if you consider a 3-year storm to be 1 cubic feet per second of water, then a 100-year storm might be 100 cubic feet per second of water, which is a good amount.
Gotcha. So if you were the city of Central and you were the P&Z engineer, let's go further than that. Let's say you were the mayor. How would you change what we're doing as to what we should be doing?
I, for one, would take.
For what? Well, let's qualify. Let's qualify a little bit further. How would you change from what we're doing to what we should be doing, based upon your experience working on hundreds of these sites all across the country, and have seen the development from starting from nothing, starting from an unmodified piece of property to a completely modified piece of property. So if you were the city mayor and you were going to pass a new ordinance and say we can only start building this types of subdivisions in these types of ways, and then I think when you're finished with drainage and infrastructure, I'll take it a step further.
So if I had the ultimate say, first I'll say that the city of Central, when they incorporated into a city, adopt a lot of East Baton Rouge Parish criteria. Their design manual that they have online is pretty cookie cutter. It's almost identical to a lot of other what we call extraterritorial jurisdictions, which are basically unincorporated areas. They don't belong to any city. They just sit within a county or parish somewhere. And it's a very low standard of criteria. It pretty much needs a developer to come in and they have a lot of say so. They can do a lot of different things. They can build things look really cheap. And there's not much the city can say about it because it's in their design criteria. Basically, the city engineers that do the review, they may have their own opinions on the matter, but their reach only extends to what the manual allows. So my first step would be to look at the design manual and have competent guys go through and say, okay, we're going to increase our criteria for this. We're going to increase our minimum standards for that, and I think that would probably ease a lot of suffering when it comes to people's concerns over drainage.
Okay, well let's take it a step further. So if you increase the standards for drainage, or let's say elevations, impermeable surfaces, concretes, driveways, whatever they may be, you also increase the cost of the developer, correct?
Yes. So that's another thing is if the development is held to a higher standard generally, and which I think they should be, it makes it a little tougher for the developer to come in and just have free reign to put whatever they want on the ground. You could say that maybe it deters them to an extent, or maybe maybe a better way to put it would be they're a little more diligent in the way they go about considering what they're going to put on the ground.
So if you have, let's do another requirement. Let's get away from drainage slightly. Let's say you have a subdivision that is a 10-acre plot. What requirement in the jurisdiction that you're in do you have that the city makes you build into the design for that area that is a common area for all residents, say a park?
Yeah, generally, I mean, a lot of times those type of amenities are up to the developer themselves. Generally, the rule of thumb for floodplain mitigation is 10% of the land will have to be accounted for in volume of storage. So if you take that, so if you have 10 acres, you take out 10%, you've got 9 acres left. A lot of times, depending on the area, they'll do studies based on traffic flow, based on residents in the area, and they'll say, okay, well, we think we can sell more lots if we put a park here, or maybe a community school.
Could you require that if you were mayor? Would you require, say, 10%? I think is a great number because that's actually a number I was discussing with someone else today. So if you have a 10-acre plot, you could dedicate 1 acre of that plot, that development to a park or maybe a tennis court. So if you had a 40-acre plot, so you would dedicate 4 acres, right?
Yes.
If If you had a plot the size of the T&D that's 100 acres, you would have to incorporate 10 acres into that development. And that development would also have to, you could have certain criteria that says, okay, after you reach a certain development size, that you can't just build a park with swings and slides. You have to build a basketball court or a gymnasium. Have you ever seen that?
Well, generally what will happen is a developer, when they come into a city or whatever jurisdiction they're in, they will have to go commonly enter agreements with the city. Okay, we have 75 acres or 100 acres. We want to develop. We want to turn it into a subdivision. We want to have 10% of this property is going to be commercial. Maybe a storefront, maybe businesses. Who knows? 90 or the other 80% or 80% will be residential land. Maybe 10% they want to do some sort of amenities or pond or fishing pond or whatever. And the city will say, okay, we're going to let you do that, but first we want to have some agreements first. If you want to do this, you're going to have to provide a TIA, which is a traffic impact analysis. Okay, you have 200, 300, 400 new homes coming in. Based on the traffic analysis, that shows that we're going to have to add, instead of having 2 lanes in front of the subdivision for the entrance, you're going to have to provide 4 lanes. You're going to have to expand this roadway to reduce traffic flow. You're going to have to increase some drainage. You're going to have to take some drainage considerations in on the street. You're going to have to provide some aesthetics like landscaping features and stuff like that. And I think that's one thing that Central doesn't require enough of.
Gotcha. So, and I agree. So, have you ever seen, here's really my biggest kicker, is we out here in Central, or rural, would you say? We're 80% rural, maybe even more than that, maybe 85% rural. So if you took these big developments like the T&D that everybody, Shoe Creek that everybody is so passionate about, one side or the other. And if you built in, could you require a developer, which I know you can because I've done it, I'm only asking it as a question so it's interactive. Could you require a developer to, when they're doing joint trenching and they're digging the surfaces for all of these homes, could you require the developer to do certain things like putting 10 gigabit internet fiber in the ground? Could you require them to, make some sort of telecommunications upgrade that's not normally available as part of your P&Z permit?
Yes. Yeah, you could do that. Generally speaking, at least where the areas that I work in, a lot of times if the city will require them to provide those sorts of improvements, it will become at least a partially reimbursable expense. So yeah, they will provide streets and fiber or whatever it may be, whatever the city requires in the agreement. It could be anything. It could be a statute. It could be anything. Sometimes the city will say, okay, well, we will reimburse you through bond disbursements, which is another thing, from my understanding, that City of Central doesn't really dabble in at all, which they should look into. Whoever was fortunate enough to come around in November. Bond development is the way to go. Basically, I don't believe City of Central has really done any sort of bonds or issued any sort of bonds since they've incorporated into a city. If they have, I'm not aware of it. But basically, it is just the loan that the city takes out to pay for some sort of improvement, and it is reimbursed back through some sort of sewer tax or water tax or property tax or something like that. And it is a very small amount of money, but it is definitely beneficial to the city as far as aesthetics and drainage improvements.
Correct.
Uh,
Let's talk about who was that question for?
Amite.
Yeah. They want to know what the difference between, which I know, but I'm going to let you explain it because you're familiar with those two companies better than I am. The difference between IBTS and CSRS.
So IBTS is currently the city services engineer. They provide city services like cleaning ditches, providing potholes. I know there's guys out there, or at least one guy out there that doesn't believe this, but IBTS is the custodian of record. They are tasked with.
I didn't know you.
They are tasked with maintaining public records for the city of Central. If you have to put in a public records request or 10 public records requests, they are the people that you want to talk to.
Right. So we have a maintenance contract with IBTS that's responsible for pretty much any maintenance that the city needs to do, whether it be Gonzo, 1 second. So whether it be filling a pothole or digging out someone's ditch in their front yard or fixing a culvert, that's IBTS. IBTS is also responsible for plan review. IBTS is also responsible for making sure the engineering specs are met on new development.
That's right, inspections. That's true.
Inspections. So we're actually, think about this, guys. Really think about this. We're actually contracting out. I'm not bashing the mayor. I like Junior. We're actually contracting out what gets approved to be built in our city and what the specs, and make sure they're meeting those certain types of specs by a non-city employee, direct employee. How's that working out? Why don't we have our own engineering group? Why don't we have our own planning commission? Why don't we have citizens that are reviewing plans before they get submitted to the PNC? Why all this disruptionness that we have in the city? And really, it's over minute issues. We all agree pretty much for the same stuff. It's just pretty much the direction and maybe a small twist on those issues one way or the other. Why do we not have the citizens? Really wasn't going to get into this tonight, but why do we not have the citizens or a citizens group that these plans are getting submitted to? They're following the standard schematic that they get approved or disapproved by. Then, after they meet that approval process, being sent to the P&Z for their approval, which I think should be a city employee and not IBTS, not a contracted company. I think that we should have our own engineer. I mean, my understanding is we got $40 million in our savings accounts. $50,000 isn't going to make us or break us a year to hire an engineer to do that. Why do we not have our own guy that is setting those standards? Why are we contracting that out to a company that has no skin in the game? None. Amazing to me. I'm not hacking on Junior. I know that he's following, a plan that was implemented before his tenure. But I do think that needs to be thought about again, and people need to consider changing that. Because I think that if you have an engineer that lives in Central, maybe it's a retired engineer. You're paying him minimum, what an engineer can make, 55, 65 grand a year. And he's the one that reviews these plans and says, hey, okay, that meets our criteria. And quite honestly, even making the requirements even more, making to where they have so many amenities to build. Curb and gutters should be built. Underground telecommunication systems should be built. And requiring and increasing the standards. It only does one thing. We're not going to stop development. That's going to happen inevitably. But we certainly could make the standards so high and the bar high enough to where if someone wants to develop out of it, that's great. We encourage that. But it's going to be a very nice facility. It's going to have zero or no impact on any of the facilities around it. And secondly, if we're going to do the underground of it, why are we not requiring fiber to be installed that is owned by the city? And then we can rent that fiber out to Cox, E-Tel, AT&T, revenue. Why not? They want to build out here. We can certainly require them to do anything. We can make them jump through a hoop. We can't stop them from building out here. But we certainly can make the requirements a lot tougher. And we certainly can make sure that more citizens are more involved in the decision making. Not hacking on anyone by saying that or making that statement. I have my disagreements with everybody on each side of those issues, but we certainly should change our way of thinking. We should quit thinking like small town. We could certainly do no development. Stop all development altogether. I heard that. I think that's somebody's campaign slogan. Stop all development. Okay, great. Let's do that. Let's stop all development. Let's be Watson. Let's have a trailer next to a house with their sewage laying on top of the ground, or the streets and highways fall to pieces because we don't have the tax revenue to fix them. So let's do that. Let's become rural Watson. I think everybody would be happy with that. That's not a good idea. That's not a good idea. What the idea is we do development, but we do development and we set the bar high. We make the citizens originally approve the plans. We hire our own engineer. We put an engineer on the staff, not an IDTS engineer. We have our own engineer. And our engineer increases the standard for these developments. Underground fiber, curb and gutter only, 6-inch slabs, 6-inch pavements. Driveways can be so long, can't have a fence, can only have this type of fence. We make those requirements. If they want to build out here, great, you can build out here, but you're going to meet this plan. I went to Arizona a while back, and I drove through Phoenix, the outskirts of Phoenix. I can't remember the exact town I was in. But what I noticed about that town is everything was uniform. Every house was similar. Every street was similar. Every building was similar. And so I asked why. And it was because their building requirements were so high. And it was a beautiful city. But they had such high building requirements. The property value was boom, even though they had of course, they had the real estate problems that they had out there over the past few years. But everything was a beautiful city. And everything was uniform and everything was great. So I would recommend that we take a city like that, or a city like Austin, Texas, or a city like Katy, where Chris is specifically talking about, and we start implementing some of those ideas because they're proven. It's kind of like when I do coding work. A lot of people say, why aren't you coding that from scratch? Or why are you using that code because that code was used over here? Because it works. If I code something from scratch, it may not work. So why not code something that's proven? It's a proven schematic. It's proven to work, and it's successful. And that's what I suggest we do, is we look at some other cities and see what their success rates are. We can stay rural. Nobody's arguing that point. I moved out here because it was rural. I moved out here originally because I thought back before we were part of the central school system. Moved out here because at that time I thought we had good schools. I wasn't that correct on that at that time. Now it's different now, for sure. So why don't we require this thing? We should start doing that. We should start doing a lot of things that we're not doing. It's not Junior's fault. I'm not blaming him. I'm not blaming Mac Watts. I'm certainly not blaming David Barrow. I would say that the platform of bringing Central back to where it was is probably not a good idea. That's a failing strategy. Chris, would you agree with that? If you let's maintain what we have, and let's not build any more tax base. Would you think that's a winning strategy?
I went through the Central school system. I attended Central Middle, and when I think of bring Central back, I think of the years that I spent in Central Middle and how it was falling apart. And I don't think anybody wants. I don't think that was a beautiful or aesthetically pleasing school for anyone. No, I wouldn't want to put my son through that school.
All right, Gonzo.
I can see why they tore it down.
All right, so Gonzo. No, that's not what anybody's saying. Technically, Gonzo is asking. So newer developments could potentially fund solving existing drainage problems.
So in sense, yes. Newer developments could potentially solve existing drainage problems by through agreements with the city. So, like we were talking about earlier, if you go propose a development in a certain area, you want to increase impermeable surfaces or what have you, the city can say, okay, well, you're going to increase, the drainage runoff, so we're going to require you to provide enough amenities to allow for all that flow plus more. And they can improve, not only rehabilitate what's existing, depending on the vicinity of the development. I mean, you can't have a developer, or I'm not going to say you can't, but it's not common practice to have a developer improve something that they're not really impacting. But yeah, that happens all the time. It's pretty common where we're at.
So you can have a developer, for example, you have a developer build a subdivision off of Hooper Road, but there may be a channel that's draining to over off of Wax, and you could require him to improve that culvert that's over off of Wax Road.
Yeah, I mean, it's situational, substantial. I mean, if they have some issues, I mean, I would think as a developer, I wouldn't want to improve something that has nothing to do with my development. I would just be turned off by the situation, probably go find somewhere else.
Well, developers are going to be more based off of a spreadsheet. They're going to, what the bottom line is, how much money I'm going to make at the end of the day.
Right.
And so if he has to build a culvert over off of Wax because he's going to make $1 million or $10 million, he's probably going to put the culvert in, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, well, likely. Yeah, it happens. It happens pretty often, and sometimes, agreements can be anything from improvements to timelines. They can say, hey, look, we don't want you to build it all at once. We want to spread this out over the course of a year. There can be all kinds of different agreements. I've seen all kinds of crazy things.
Let's take one more question. We're going to wrap this up. Stephanie asked, how long would it take to improve drainage? I think that's a trick question. And the reason being is all the drainage that we have now is currently existing.
Well, that brings one of my topics up is not all the drainage issues in the city of Central belong to the city of Central. So it's really hard to say. I don't know who here has faith in the state of Louisiana for providing, improvements, but
Any more questions?
But some things are required. Like Hooper, I know there's some spots in Hooper that people think that belong to the city central that really don't. I think maybe even Wax Road, Girdle Springs Road for sure. I mean, there's a difference between localized flooding and large-scale inundation. Comey, Beaver Bayou, Amite Rivers, those are not managed by the city. I know that. So I mean, they don't really have any say so or really even any funding to do that. Somebody proposed a while back to provide bonding to, or at least what they call a bond election to the citizens of Central to basically finance the improvements or the cleaning and dredging of the canal, which that's not right either. How can you? I mean, Central's not the only city that drains into that creek or into the AP or into the Kobe. I mean, those things stretch for miles and miles and miles. Not to mention all the money that it would cost the city. If you think about bond financing those improvements, even if it's within the city, only within the city, it would be extremely expensive. And not to mention it, before the drainage study comes out, you may come to find out later that a lot of the runoff is coming from it could be coming from north of us. It could be coming from upstream.
Right.
And builds up on top of us, or it could even be downstream backup that backs all the way up to us after large events.
Well, after speaking to the state, from my understanding, our biggest problem is water stacking up. When we have a rain event north of us, I'm gonna finish our question for you in just a second. But when rain stacks up north of us and then flows into us, say we have a rain event that's at St. Francisville that flows down through Zachary and Slaughter, and the rain event also comes across. So that's where a lot of the water is stacking up because of some of the silt ends that are in the Amite and the Cometes. That's my understanding from speaking to some of the.
I think a lot of that probably came from the August 26th.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. So one last question, unless you have something else, is local bond elections for drainage upgrades and existing subdivisions. Explain what that is.
So basically, a bond election is a vote.
A vote at the poll, just like you wouldn't vote for mayor or for a councilman. So vote at the poll.
It's a vote. It's a lot of times the votes are even done online. You can go online on a certain day or something like that and do a vote and say, okay, we're proposing a $3 million improvement for a district or a small area. Could be a subdivision. Could be anything. Could be the entire city. Who knows? It could be whatever. And basically, you vote and say, okay, I will take on a quarter of a cent increase or maybe a 10-cent increase in my water bill every month to essentially reimburse a developer for improving a certain area.
So we have so let's take, so I can break it down so everybody understands it. So let's say you live in Bellingrath Lakes, for example. You're having a flooding issue in the backside of Bellingrath Lakes. Could you propose a bond issue that specifically impacts that one subdivision that does not impact the rest of the city?
Yeah, I mean, you could consider them their own district. I'm not exactly familiar with.
So instead, we mostly have PUDs here instead of MUDs, right? I think you explained that to me a while ago. And so you could do a bond election for their own MUD.
Right. I'm not exactly sure the size of the PUDs in the central area, but essentially it's broken down by districts. You propose a improvement within a certain district, and the citizens vote and say yes. Basically, a surety company will provide a loan to the city. The city will promise to reimburse the developer once final acceptance is complete. So basically, the developer will go in, pay an engineer to do all the design work. They will they'll upfront all the costs for pretty much all the construction work. And then once the city says, okay, well, we want these, there may be a couple things that they're not happy with that they want the developer to fix, the developer going to pay for that, and then the city will reimburse them to this point.
Okay. You have anything you want to add? Because we're going over an hour now, which is well beyond what we intended on doing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I got tons of stuff to talk about, but I don't want anybody to fall asleep.
So what let's do is, it's 9:30. So what let's do is let's wrap this one up, and maybe we'll do another one in a couple of days if you're interested.
Yeah, sure.
I think educating the community. I mean, it's a community you love that I love. I think educating the community to what actually can be done, what actually is going on, as opposed to all this Facebook back and forth of this, that, and it's so confusing. This is actually just the basic facts, unedited truth. And
I'll if anybody posts to the Central Community Network page to this post, I'll try to answer any questions that I can think of. I'm sure Mark can answer all the other ones.
Yeah, anything that I can think of, ask them. I'm not here to bash anyone or talk bad about anyone. I think that we need to figure out a way to figure out what middle ground is. Figure out how we become together, how we become unified. Unified like we were. I mean, come on. Most of you people I know. Let's get back to there and figure out how to get back to there. I mean, none of us are that bad. We're all out. None of us are criminals or convicts or drug addicts or whatever we may be. We're all out in Central, a rural area. And we got like a .02 crime rate out here. That's why we moved out here. So let's quit tearing each other down. I'm guilty of it too. I'll say it again. But let's quit doing that. Let's figure out how to come together. Anyway, that's a wrap for me. Chris, appreciate everything you did. I appreciate your talk. Anybody's got anything to say? You know the group? Central Community Network, CN, something like that. Join it, ask it. We can answer it. We will. God bless. Good night.
Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July. Nobody's bashing.